I'm Greg Rain. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Shoot. Thanks for tuning in today. We're going to talking about the 8 attributes of effective content marketing. Joined today by our friend and CMO of MRY, David Berkowitz. David, are you there?
I am here.
Great, wonderful. Thank you for being with us today. Just so we can, for the agenda, we'll do some quick intros real fast, but then we'll dive into the content marketing aperture for the first 15 minutes or so. We'll follow up with some great case studies that David's prepared. Then we'll have some Q&A between David and I, as well as Q&A from the audience. And then just a couple minutes at the end to wrap up. Before we jump in, David, perhaps you can just give a little intro about yourself and sort of what you do on a daily basis over at MRY.
Yeah, sure. And hi, everyone. It's David here. And I love that even in this title slide, Greg, you're still dressed so much better than me. So at least it feels like just getting back together with you like we often get to do. And so, yeah, I'm here at MRY, and a creative agency that's part of Publicis Group under Starcom MediaVest Group. And so the agencies work with a lot of great clients, and like Visa, Johnson & Johnson, AT&T, Adobe, and others, all of which we do quite a bit of content marketing for. And it's something that I actually got started on in my career a while back before it was trendy to call it content marketing. So it's really a pleasure to share the webinar stage with you today.
Great. Well, and David was our first pick for our first guest in this series because we've had so many other great exchanges, interactions with him over time. So I think you guys are in for a real treat today. So I'm going to dive in. I think at Shoot, sort of our mission and goal is to help give brands mastery over the world's visual content. And we ultimately believe that content marketing is a critical component to sort of the future marketing itself. I think we all know that content's sort of always been an important part of the process, as David sort of said. It's just now got a fancy name. But that's how things tend to evolve over time. When I really started thinking about what we were going to talk about today, we really sort of considered this idea that the future really isn't really the future of content. It's really just that content is sort of so critical to our success today as marketers. I think that fundamentally the challenge is that we are asked to produce so much and to engage with our customers in so many new and interesting ways that content is really at the heart of all of that interaction. And so brands, I believe, increasingly are feeling the pressure of trying to deliver, results or interesting experiences to their customers, and the rate and pace of that has sort of been evolving, right? From sort of the larger quarterly goals, but also and campaigns, but now also sort of more real-time experiences through social and other things like that. So everyone sort of feels this impetus to sort of create more content. But, of course, the challenge is that can also freak a lot of people out. They're not sure how to do that or how to react. It's pretty amazing when you look at sort of some of the research. I believe this data point comes from the Content Marketing Institute, but something like 90% of B2C companies, I think it's like as high as 83 or 85% for B2B companies, are already using content marketing. And what's really, really amazing about that, though, is that, one, that shouldn't be a surprise, right? Content's always sort of been a part of the way that we communicate with our customer. But what is really, really scary, I think, is that only 34% of those people actually identify that it is effective, right? And what I think the challenge there, of course, is that you really sort of, it's hard to know how effective something is when it's hard, when you can't see the edges of it, right? And sort of not necessarily understanding it and where it's working for you, where it's not working for you. And so this is, I think, an area of growth going forward for all marketers is actually trying to understand the effectiveness of their content marketing, just like we've tried to understand the effectiveness of our marketing in general. Now you may be asking, why is it that so few people actually feel like they have no idea if what they're doing is effective? And I think that the reason that that's the case is that largely there's a sort of a lack of strategy. And what I mean by that is not that we're doing things aimlessly. There's a little bit of that potentially, but what I think is actually happening is that there's data out in research that actually shows that the folks that have a documented strategy actually far outperform sort of the folks who are sort of winging it or sort of adjusting it ad hoc, right? And so devising a strategy for how you're going to use and leverage content as part of your marketing program, I think is ultimately one of the most important things that every marketer needs to do today. Now, at Shoot, we spend a ton of time helping our customers sort of create and execute campaigns and think about how consumers are consuming the content. And what we decided to do is that we wanted to also help in this process. And we took a look at the over 200 campaigns that we've actually done in the last couple of years and looked at what were the things that made those campaigns successful, right? And from that, we basically extracted or pulled out a framework that we believe that can help you. Now, our framework is actually about the content itself. It doesn't really provide you guidance around how to actually deploy that content into the world or anything else. But what it does do is sort of give you a way to think about the content problem at your organization and ultimately devise a strategy. So we call this framework the content marketing aperture, and as you can see, we're a big company. We like camera metaphors, and you can see that this sort of aperture has sort of 8 blades on it, right? And so these, each of these topics or areas really are considerations that we think that every marketer should take into account as they plan and prepare their content strategy, and then ultimately as they devise individual pieces of content for their customers. So I'm going to just dive right into that and walk through each of these and explain them a little bit closer. First on our list is that we believe your content really should be user-inspired, right? And the reason for that is that there is just a crap ton of it out there, right? Like our consumers and our customers are now a perfect mirror for us to hold ourselves up to and actually see how they perceive our brand. And what that does is provides us really a wealth of opportunity to understand what a customer might engage with and ultimately inform our own decisions about what we're going to create. We can learn from our customers like in really amazing ways today. And I'll just show you an example of this. So this is a campaign that Starbucks ran a year and a half ago now, I think. And what they noticed, right, when they looked at the media being created by fans around even just the simple idea of the hashtag Starbucks, they noticed tons and tons of selfies, right? And this is where, your good collaboration with your agency is a really effective tool. Because they took that idea and they married it with the more popular duck face sort of trend and came up with this idea of sit face. And the sit face campaign was very successful. That in fact, that it's actually still running, even though Starbucks isn't actively publishing it or pushing that idea. But what sit face allowed them to do was actually capture great, authentic customer moments by simply looking at what their customers were creating to begin with. Here's another example. The team loves to put these things in here because they know I basically screwed up all of the words around it. But this is the Fault in Our Stars music video. Now, what's amazing here is that when they were producing the video, the recording company actually enlisted the fans to create all of the media that would populate the wall behind it. So every piece of art that you see here is actually created by a fan, right? And it actually is the entire, literally the backdrop of this story. And so a really amazing moment and really a truly rewarding experience for the fans themselves. Now, we also think next up on our list is that we ultimately believe that your content obviously has to be targeted, right? No content should really exist without a master, and we really should know who we're trying to serve when we create that piece of content, right? So knowing that audience and doing all your homework and research to actually understand who the people that you are trying to reach are is actually one of the most effective tools you can have when you devise your content strategy. Now, that means that once you do know your customer, that you have to sort of like be willing to act and think like them, right? And so here's a good example, Victoria's Secret Pink. Their target is women of college age, and you can see all the various sort of ways that they are creating content that lines up with one, not only an aesthetic, but a tone and a message that matches to that audience. And they're constantly reevaluating that to make sure that it stays in touch. Now, I alluded to this earlier. Next up is ultimately that today we're seeing a sort of an explosion of the number of channels that we actually have to reach our customer on. There's like, unlike in the past where sort of we had a more confined universe of sort of print, radio, and TV, today we've got dozens of social channels, and every week or a couple of weeks it seems like there's some new place that potentially I may want to put my time, right? We can't reach our customer anymore at one specific place, and so we need to actually be present in more than one place, right? And so being wherever they are is really, really critical. Now, to that point though, and I think like really ultimately towards devising your strategy is also knowing where your customers are though, right? We don't have to necessarily service every channel just because it exists. What we're trying to do and what we want to do is find where we can have the most impact. So for example, Chanel, a much more luxury brand, much more conservative, but also very clearly knows, like for example, if they want to be on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, right? Now in comparison, for example, though, think about Taco Bell, right? Highly experimental, much younger audience. They sort of are willing and daring to try new ways to use every medium that comes out, right? And that's really about the commitment they've made to content, and then also understanding that their customers are in all of these different channels, and ultimately knowing that their customers understand that they are willing to be at the edge. Next up on our list is our favorite here at Shoot, but ultimately, we believe that all marketing is inherently or destined to be visual in one way or another, right? And there's a lot of great reasons for that. Obviously, first and foremost, visual content is just processed faster by the brain. People will experience it. It draws attention, right? And even today, actually, now, you actually don't have a choice in most cases not to actually prepare and present visual content. Facebook's latest guidance to brands and advertisers is that you won't even be eligible to make it into the news feed if you don't have a visual content, a piece of visual content present inside of your post. And if you look at all the new channels that have come up, Pinterest, Snapchat, et cetera, they're all inherently visual platforms, right? Now, it also works, right? So visual posts on Facebook, they get 2 times the number of likes. Visual tweets with photos attached to them have 5 times more engagement. So these are sort of numbers that we can't deny, right? It's not a nice to have anymore. This is an absolute requirement. The great thing about visual, though, is that you have an infinite universe available to you how you choose to express your brand. And so you're not really confined or limited in how you can leverage visual content. There's just a smattering of different ways that different customers have put together experiences leveraging photos or videos in the process. So really the world's your oyster here. You can do anything you want with visual, but it is an absolute requirement today. Now I think this is actually a very sort of timely one. I think it often feels like we're in a rush to sort of get on top or get ahead of the next thing, and that's not always really the most perfectly advised sort of approach to sort of creating content. There are millions and millions of stories, but the process of being thoughtful is ultimately about being a great curator, finding the right stories to tell and highlight, as opposed to jumping on everything. And here I'll actually use the counterexample. It's actually easier to fail than it is to succeed, right? One misstep can last a lot longer than one great thing. And all of these things can actually help to little by little undo all the good work you're doing to create a positive image and a positive engagement and relationship with your customer. This is just, for example, some of the tweets around like the Oscars, and for example, even more recently, just recently during the football game, right? Around Martin Luther King, it was just sort of like this is just the kind of stuff you don't need to do. But these seem like opportunities. They seem, but those lightweight comments, like taking that 5 seconds to actually pause and think, like, is this actually something that I want to say? Is this something that I would be willing to defend, right? Being careful and thoughtful is really, really critical, I think, to preserving your efforts. So almost to the end, but next up on our list is this idea of creating evergreen opportunities with content, right? I think like one of the challenges with content marketing as a whole is that sort of there is this perpetual need to feed the beast, right? But there are ways that you can design your program to actually be self-fulfilling, right? And so the best content ultimately is going to create itself, right? It will find its own energy to continue moving forward, right? And I think the way to do this is to actually map your ideas to things that are not perfectly timely, but more to themes or things that fit to your brand ethos, right? And as you find those lower level concepts, they have more reuse and more applicability over time. Turning customer insights and things that map to your core values are an absolute easy way to achieve this. Now let me show you an example. This is Benefit Cosmetics. They run a campaign called Realties, and this is like a mascara that they sell. But what's interesting about this is that they have these hyper-engaged consumers and customers that are automatically sharing great content. And so Benefit does an amazing job of sort of drawing out that content from their customer. But what's really compelling about this I think is like their Facebook tab or something like that. They have this ongoing sort of, hey, enter and show us your eyelashes. But they are then able to, because they've cleared rights to use this content, actually drizzle that content back out. And so they receive hundreds and hundreds of submissions to the Realties campaign every week, maybe even more. But what they're able to do is then little by little highlight some of that content, and it's timeless, right? It doesn't actually map to a news event or anything else. Now, what I like to point out, though, is look at the type of engagement they're getting purely from consumer-generated media that maps well to their core beliefs, and ultimately that's putting the customer on a pedestal. And we think and we know that there are more of these opportunities, but they do require thinking about them and devising the strategy around it up front. So it's less about being real time and ultimately about being all the time, right? And I think this is where we have an opportunity to design programs that can be more and more evergreen. Now, we talked earlier about sort of the number of channels that we actually have to service, but what we didn't really cover there was that every channel also has its own personality, right? And so your ultimate responsibility is to be a good citizen in each of the channels. And even the audience that you may have highlighted, they may act differently depending on the environment that they're in. So what we need to do as we devise our content is that when we get ready to transform it for each channel, is to map it back to that experience directly. And I'll use a very simple example here. Everyone's busy with Starbucks, and if you go to the top half of the screen, you see sort of what the corporate website looks like. It's very akin to the experience you have in the stores, right? It feels like it's got that very that Starbucks aesthetic to it, right? Down below, though, notice this is their Tumblr page, and the difference in their Tumblr page is that it looks entirely different. Right? On Tumblr, animated GIFs are king, and so Starbucks uses a wide number of different kinds of animations. The layout is fundamentally different. Even the color palette is entirely different. And really, by mapping their experience to the platform, they're able to have great returns from each environment, but servicing the audience effectively. Now, last on our list, promised to be done and let David get in here. But we ultimately believe that the secret to ultimately having great content is that it needs to be shareable, right? And so the simple test I give you is if you wouldn't share this piece of content, not because you work there, but if you wouldn't share it unto itself, then why did you make it at all, right? You need to find and create those kinds of opportunities, right? Like, so we need to find ways to make the content more shareable. So the little hack that we love to point out to a lot of our customers is that if you can actually find a way to make your customer the center of that content, they'll inherently want to share it, because that little bit of a, seeing myself inside of the brand is actually a really, really powerful idea. And again, this can work and does work. This is a campaign, the Little Black Dress campaign, that actually Ann Taylor does, and they were encouraging women to try on black dresses like in store at the venue or at home, right? And share that media back. And well, guess what? A photo of me is something that I tend to broadcast back to my friends. Maybe I'm trying to get an opinion on it, right? Or I'm just proud of how it looks, right? But what's really amazing is that can really work, right? Like authentic is a really powerful sort of factor to this, right? So on the left, take a look. We have Kate Hudson wearing her little black dress, 20 shares. But compare that to the right, a customer, not a celebrity, exact same environment except getting double the engagement, right? And part of that is that, she was able to share that photo back out to her own social channels and drive people to this experience, but also people can directly relate and connect to this photo. And so ultimately, we think that creating shareable content, stuff that people really, really will want to tell others about, is how you're going to see the best kind of ROI from the work you're doing. Last year, 2 years ago now, at our first VRS conference, we were lucky enough to have Michelle on stage, and this was her quote, and it really took it to heart that most brands really what we focus on is sort of putting ourselves at the center of the story, and I think ultimately that the more that we can find ways to put the customer right and find that authentic moment, make that the heart of our story, the more successful we can be. So that's my part.
Greg, thanks for all that. It's really I learned something each time I see you talk about your whole Aperture and just I don't think there are enough people talking about content marketing and ROI, and I think that's going to be a really big theme this year. So really great to see Shoot leading the charge in that regard. And it's something that this kind of stuff comes up all the time. I don't think there's any client we work with that we don't do at least some kind of content marketing for, and for some it's the driving force of a lot of the marketing we're doing, even under Starcom MediaVest group. We're part of the content group in their network as opposed to say connections and other groups. So by all means, it's going to be just even more of a driving force for us and our brands in the year and more ahead. I wanted to really focus on a handful of examples that stand out, some B2C, some B2B, and just where they really what we can learn from content marketing about them. And then I welcome getting right into Q&A. So hope those of you on the call are getting your questions ready, if not asking them already. I want to start off with one of my favorites from 2014. It's something Mercedes did with their Build Your Own GLA campaign. Essentially what Mercedes did was they hacked Instagram. And so this is something that, by the way, only works on your mobile device. So if you were to check this out from your desktop, assuming you even own one anymore, then it wouldn't really do anything. But if you go to the GLA account from mobile, you can customize a car and basically do a car configurator by going through a number of steps and adjusting the color and the kind of wheels and a few other options. And they did it by setting up a whole bunch of related accounts, and you can see the initial one, that GLA Build Your Own, is the one on the left. And then they tagged all these other accounts in the photo, and so you could just keep going through and seeing what your own version of that GLA looks like. And so they did something that I didn't think could be done, and to show you how to use a medium in a really, really innovative way. And I think looking at that, what's great is that they didn't have to call Instagram for some custom integration. It was just really smart creative. And car companies in general, they do have an advantage in that people are really interested in not just the products but the brands. And so, yeah, it's an advantage that not everyone has, my agency included. So I wish, yeah, everyone was clamoring for MRY T-shirts, and that was drumming up a lot of business for us. But you use the advantages you have, and Mercedes clearly wasn't resting on its laurels. They're trying to push the industry forward. Another really timely example of content marketing. Just this morning, I was watching the latest spot from Band of Brands, the new Newcastle Super Bowl campaign. They keep making a bigger stink that they can't afford a Super Bowl spot. This year, they're actually doing almost a weird kind of B2B marketing, because if you watch their videos so far, at least leading up to it, they aren't designed for consumers at all. They're designed for people who are living inside that very tinny echo chamber of advertising, and so it's just reaching out to other brands to fund some local spots, since they can't get in the big game with butt owning that. But it's great counter programming. It's stuff that, yeah, even if they're ultimately going to have some kind of TV spot airing, they're really making all their noise off what they're doing digital. It's the same thing, same approach of BuzzFeed working with Friskies, where they're going to be airing some local spots in some cat-themed cities like Los Gatos and Kitty Hawk, and so it doesn't really matter like which 20 people are going to view the ads on TV. I know those are big cities, so pardon if anyone is from such esteemed cat-named towns. But in any case, they're doing it all for the content that they're generating from it. I was just reading this morning that Pepsi is producing 3 times the amount of content around its halftime show than they did last year. And last year, content marketing was pretty big too. So the fact that they're tripling their output from it, again, I mean, there are just so many signs of how it's like, yeah, it's nice what's going on TV, but what's happening beyond that is a much bigger deal, because that's what spreads. That's what people are going to lean forward with. And speaking of big events, one of the clients that we're especially proud of is Visa, and so they've done some phenomenal work with the Olympics over the years, and actually since I believe dating back to the 2008 Olympics, what they've done is offered some way for fans to thank Olympians, and so feels really organic. If you look at the mosaic here, you're going to have a hard time seeing Visa's logo plastered all over the place. Instead, what you're going to see is, if you look closely, that you've got all these avatars of people who wrote in thanking Olympians, like this amazing medal-winning duo right here. And so the whole idea, and then these fans got personalized content back in return, in terms of like a little autographed image that had their names on it. So it was very two-way. It was a great way for the brand to bring people into the story, what MRY refers to as story making. And with all that Visa, through initiatives like this and some other things they did, and they were the most engaged with U.S. advertiser during the Sochi Olympics. So very excited to see what they're going to do for Rio in 2016. Looking at some kind of unexpected brands, BNY Mellon was a really interesting one. They're also a client. We worked with them to launch Someday, an investment product, just to make it stupid simple to save money. And so BNY Mellon is the nation's they're the nation's oldest bank. It's 230 years old. They've actually never put out a B2C product. So this is the first time they're doing so. They had to create essentially a skunkworks innovation division within BNY Mellon to go and pull this off, and they were spending a lot of time in our office, and what I want to point out is the mobile app there. They so they were able to create a little interesting hack where if you link your Instagram or Twitter accounts to your Someday investment account, then it will automatically deposit a predetermined amount of money into your investment account from your checking or savings bank account. And so I can't say that this is going to be like the driving force of banking and investments going forward, but it was really interesting that in building a product from the ground up, they were looking at what kind of content people can generate to further spread the word about Someday, do some of that marketing for them, but also kind of work it into people's lives in a way that it is relatively natural for consumers. Just to share another B2B example, there's a great blog from Rand Fishkin, SEO Moz, so search engine optimization, and so he does really well every week where he has these whiteboard Friday sessions, and you see you can just tell from the image alone that anyone who can sport a mustache like that and a moose shirt like that is by definition a character. I could never get away with either of those, let alone his hairdo. But my handwriting is also much worse than his, so I'd be a terrible whiteboarder. In any case, he's using using the assets he has and what's making something that's like a little less dry than some of these other SEO how-to guides, and it works. Right? His audience loves it, and on the B2B scale, you don't need to get millions of views to something. You just need to speak to enough of the right people and enough of the right decision makers. Reminds me a little bit about something I read from Nassim Nicholas Taleb in his book Fooled by Randomness, where he was talking about how he doesn't care if millions of people are reading his books or other stuff he's writing, if it's like the 10 people he most wants to influence, right? Like imagine for him if the Treasury Secretary was reading his work and the person who might be next in line to read the Treasury Secretary, then he doesn't care if you and I know anything about what he's doing. So he'll still be probably invited to those White House dinners where he can have that real influence. And I think that's also just something so telling for B2B. It's how do you do this kind of thing that's going to speak to the right people and find a way to get it to them. Not saying that's easy, but it also, I think, puts a little bit of the pressure off of what brands talk about when they just are, some are just inclined to always go for reach. Even Twitter came out with a product last year that yes, Twitter is trying to get hundreds of millions, if not billions, more people using Twitter. Great, but they actually did something very B2B focused at the Cannes Lion Awards in France last June, where they created these dronies, and yeah, they used some of the celebrities they were working with and invited to do this, where Sir Patrick Stewart himself was the star of the first droney, and that even used the word bromance in this initial post here. Twitter got north of 700,000 Vine loops for this, and it was basically just a drone taking a 6-second video that zoomed out from this close-up, and really just a fun shot. But Twitter here, they were targeting advertisers, right? This isn't something that like they don't think that the average consumer is going to see people in suits, taking selfies and say, "Wow, I really am going to use Twitter more for that." But if they get a little more attention from advertisers during an advertising echo chamber, like Cannes is, that's great, right? So for them, in a sense, it makes a hell of a lot more sense than Newcastle talking to the advertising echo chamber. So some of it, I'm watching that one, I'm like, wait, why are they just trying to get ad people to view their spots? Because those are the people who've got to be most interested in viewing it. And I'll wrap with one example here because I'm really eager to get into some of the Q&A with you, Greg, and with anyone else listening in. But I want to show this example that MRY put out, as you can see, called Snap Ads. So in late November, you might recall, Snapchat wound up opening up a way for people to send money to each other, so peer-to-peer payments. And I mean, we'll see if it's really used like that, but pretty innovative way to combine payments with this messaging software and with these messaging apps. And so so a few of my colleagues decided they really wanted to hack this and be the first agency to open up shop in Snapchat. Now, if you can imagine, when we're trying to solicit RFPs for $20, and by the way, our going rate is slightly more than that, in case you're trying to call us after this. Yeah, we accept these RFPs for $20 and offer to make logos and positioning statements and just some quick hits. We didn't even keep the money. We gave that to a great organization on Giving Tuesday, by the way. This came out, so after Black Friday, when people were talking a lot about donations. So yeah, this was a stunt. We are not trying to sell ourselves for so little cash, and we're not really manning the messaging apps trying to troll for business. So in this case, it's like, if we can use this to get into our own trades, then great. And to that extent, it worked, right? Like, and we did get 15 RFPs coming in, so we had something fun coming out of it. But we have a challenge, for those of you who are in B2B marketing, of having a really strangely named brand that isn't yet at least a household name and doesn't need to be. Just if we can get in front of if we could be top of mind with 100 of our key prospects ultimately, as well as a dozen of our key clients, that can make or break our decade. So in that sense, our concept of virality is that of a B2B marketer. I don't care if my mom winds up seeing the Snapcash thing or knows what Snapchat is. Mine is probably better she doesn't. So I'll breathe there for a bit and get the conversation going.
Great. Well, David, thank you for all those examples. This is, I love the breadth of places and ways that you were able to show how brands are using things. I wanted to dig a little deeper with you, David, for just a couple minutes. You mentioned some really interesting things in there, like, for example, about like Pepsi sort of tripling their sort of like content production. And I'll ask like a two-part question, I guess, like one about quality and one about quantity, right? It feels like when we think about that quality, the idea of quality, most brands tend to feel like they need to have this ultra-polished sort of experience, and that can often feel at odds with like truly authentic moments, right? Like, how have you guided the customer, like, relative to the notion of quality, relative to the stuff that they're trying to create and the message you're trying to put out?
Well, it depends, right? Like, so for AT&T, there was a focus of working with Demi Lovato to help get the word out about texting and driving for a spot that actually became a TV spot, but also became part of their content marketing. You look at, say, you go back to Visa, and they had a lot of polished stuff, and the TV worked beautiful. No question about that. We also sent a Vine creator to Sochi, and just to kind of like shoot some weird stuff, and he wasn't any official Olympic delegation, wasn't even an athlete or anything like that. It was just let's see what someone like that does for them. So and I think that there's what's far more important is just finding something with the right message that's really relevant to people, and being able to do this fast, and getting this in a way that people can really share it, and push it out through media that people are going to interact with it, that so that matters far more than quality. I love what you were showing as far as that fashion example went with Ann Taylor there, where including real people is doing far more for them than and working with celebrities. And I think celebrities, they're celebrities often for a reason, or at least they have an audience, and so by all means, working with them on something that's nicely produced, if it's going to mean reaching your target audience, great. And they also often have these built-in distribution channels. There's something to be said for that, but I think we're shifting far more toward just like that kind of stuff that's gonna. What are people really going to share with, and how to make it relevant for them rather than trying to overproduce something.
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, I think we don't even mean to bash. I think sometimes just trying to take a piece of content to other formats, to other places. Sometimes you have to recreate that moment because sort of the format dictates it, right? You mentioned sharing quite a bit, and I was curious if you might have any of your own insights just about what you felt might make content shareable. I think our hack, our simple hack was, if you could find a way to put the consumer in the center of that thing, they're more inclined to share it. But have you seen or had any experiences that you think stand out, relative to people being highly incentivized to share?
Well, I think that ultimately understanding culture goes a really long way, and so what kind of stuff it tends to trend again with your target audience. If you're targeting teens, it's going to be very different than if you're targeting professionals, for instance. So there's something to be said for being human first, and I remember how hard it was to get brands to do anything on Facebook when they just saw it as something that their kids were using, and now we're repeating that cycle again with apps like Snapchat, which still people think it's just teenage girls gossiping or worse, and not realizing that this is where hundreds of millions of images are being shared every day, and that there are several of these apps like that, and so and by the way, those messaging apps happen to be ridiculously engaging where you're not really paying attention to anything else. It's not even like a multitasking kind of thing. You're just all in, waiting for that response and reaction. So with that, then it does require that that you start then going where your audience is, and it's funny. It's like podcasts are all of a sudden trendy again. Well, before you say, "Oh, cereal was really big. I want to, become a podcast marketer." It's like listen to a few that you think your audience cares about, and try to get a sense of why this even works before it does, and that alone, I think, will at least prevent some of the bigger screw-ups, and if not, help you come to that insight that's really relevant for you. Right.
Yeah. We're all funny with our inner monologue, right? It's just that doesn't necessarily work the same when you say it out loud. I think for our last question, and then I think we have one or two from the audience as well. But relative to sort of measuring success, how do you guide your customers about and your clients, when they're what are some of the criteria or examples, or maybe representative of how customers have figured out the value that they are creating through their content marketing efforts?
Well, it's so important just to have these conversations at the outset, and I think what we're seeing is that brands need to aim, any kind of marketer needs to aim high. And see, when you talk about ROI, not just talk about it in terms of getting more shares than you did the day before or your competitors getting, right? It's more about how can this ultimately impact the business? What is this really going to do for the business? If you're putting up some native branded content on BuzzFeed, for instance, it's just asking them, well, show me and that this really is working better than something where I'm just plastering my logo all over the place and trying to blast that out there, right? And so, yeah, the gut reaction for people on this call is it does, but if you want to task your agencies, your publishers, tech companies, any other kind of partners, let alone your own teammates, to go and come to those answers. And I think that it's something that we've seen some surprising success with in terms of I mean, one of our clients really wanted to see the last year. I can't be too specific about this right now. Unfortunately, I hope to next time we might do this. But really, we're looking to see the results of a major behavior change, and so we were able to discover that in the target markets where this campaign was really big and it was heavily content driven, that there was a significant change of behavior. Again, just looking at that is such a big leap from looking at, say, online interactions. And I think it's great to look at some of those baselines as far as kind of proxy elements and especially, again, if you're like a B2B marketer, for instance, you're not going to have the scale to do a brand campaign for it. And the first few times you do anything, you might not be able to track a single lead directly. It takes some figuring out to see how all that works. But then again, if you're on that scale, then does doing some content marketing make people pay more attention, say, when you do something a little more traditional, like putting a slide share out where you're requesting leads? Is there something that can drive awareness of that and get people further into that funnel? You just have to figure out how these things can all work together.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. We do have a couple questions from the audience, so I'm gonna read off one of them, David, and we can both chime in as we think fit. Danelle had a question. I know visual marketing was touched on, but I'm curious to know what are our thoughts on the impact and effectiveness of video marketing?
Well, I mean, video is where so much of marketing is going, right? And it's something that is a huge priority for Facebook, for Twitter. I mean, it seems like everyone's investing heavily in this, and I think that this is something. I mean, now is a great time to see it in action on the biggest stage for advertising, right? You look at that Pepsi example, you look at Newcastle, you see what's going on where everything that's happening so far is how to get the most amount of views with it, and the great thing is that so if in this kind of example, if an advertiser has 20 million views or even a small fraction of that online, and they're able to get 100 million people viewing their commercial, there still, I mean, it's almost incomparable because the views online are opt-in, right? These are people who are choosing to play this, or if you're paying to promote it, then you can see how many people watch it all the way through versus skip it. So, and then you can also see interactions and shares and all that kind of engagement that you just don't get with TV. So, there's just going to be far more push for video, but video is tough to do well, right? So you've got to work with others, and it could be online celebrities, it could just be agencies or other kind of content generation partners that can do it well. It's just really tough, and most video does fall flat, which I think is underappreciated about it. Yeah,
I think if I use a comparison, I think photos are really great when you need breadth, right? You can sort of cover something from thousands of points of view, but video is really amazing for if you really want to go a little deeper, have a little more nuance, have more of an opportunity to explain. But as you said, I think with video, that this quality problem really surfaces, because I think folks, a photo, can be medium quality, probably do well, but a crappy video just still, no one wants to put one out. I think there's a lot more concern about sort of that quality question when we're looking and thinking about video in particular. Well, we have one more question though, actually. Oh, sorry, two more. We'll go back to that first one though. MJ just asked more if we could expand a little bit more on just sort of how you're less confined with visual as opposed to say text, right, and video. And I think this sort of probably dovetails well, but you know, for me, I think like video has the challenge of you have to express it with this depth, and that actually means creating an entire universe around the idea. And words can be a bit more confining. They don't necessarily scale globally, right? And they also take more time to consume. But I think with video and color, you can sort of, you know, and all the various tools that we can use as designers, we can create really interesting and intricate experiences that can be consumed very, very fast. You know, I think Adobe from the VRS conference had shown how they worked with the Behance community to recreate the Adobe logo, like in hundreds and hundreds of new and interesting variations. You know, and that was possible because it was a visual translation of an idea, right? So that interpretation, I think, is where that opportunity may be. What do you think, David? Are there any pointers you have? Or?
I can't remember the last time I've seen anything great digitally that didn't have some kind of multimedia element associated with it. And so that has been a huge shift over the past few years, and even now it's like just spend time scrolling through Twitter and see how many posts brands or publishers share that don't have any kind of images attached to it. It is, I mean, it's become so crucial, and I think so. Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of conversational stuff that you can do without it. And I think a lot of the day-to-day, in terms of responding to people, there's something to be said for just being able to quickly respond and connect with others and not wait until you have a great produced thing to go with it. But for things that are planned, I think having some kind of visual or video element is really what's going to get it seen.
Great. Well, thank you. We had one more question from Snooky. So maybe out in left field, but we're small and don't have a large social following yet in any area. Is it ever suggested to pay for followers to gain more views to content? And you know, how is this done? And David, I know you've made this case actually many times to me in person. Like, I'd love for you to share a little of that knowledge about sort of what's happening with the market relative to that sort of pay model for social.
There's this whole underbelly out there of just of people paying for views and trying to game the system. And the fact is that these are, I mean, no matter what pretty much anyone says, they're not going to be a targeted audience, and you can actually wind up hurting yourself because as more platforms like Facebook and Twitter and others take their lead and look for the rate of engagement as signals, then having a low follower count and high engagement is going to do far better than a high follower count and similar absolute numbers of engagement. So this is something that I think there's something to be said for promoted content, right? This is where all these platforms are going. So when you have something to share, even promoting your account, making sure that it's seen by the right people. Like when Twitter promotes an account to you, it's going to be because it's related to other people you follow or other things on your profile. But just purely trying to get a body count, I don't think that's really worked for anyone.
Well, and I think that's a great distinction, right? There is a natural channel here, and then there are the unnatural ones. You probably never want the unnatural ones. It probably is focusing on the wrong thing.
And if it's if it seems too good to be true, right? Or you get what you pay for. If you and one of the things it's like $5 and you'll get 5,000 followers, like you're going to get your money's worth, and maybe a bit less.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that we're running up on the end of our time today. David, it's been really, really, really great to have you here and chat with us. There's some more content from you on the blog as well. If you folks haven't had a chance to read that. I think our last bit of housekeeping, we do have our first customer event actually coming up in February in New York. If you're a customer out there and haven't heard from us or would like to attend, by all means, let us know. David, any last words?
No, just a really pleasure doing this with you. So thanks for sharing so much learning through your blog and channels like this.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, and hope to do it again soon.